Some cities rose to power against all odds. History often teaches us that great capitals are born from obvious gifts, like a mighty river for trade or a rich valley for food. But what about the ones that had none of that? This is the story of the underdog cities, the improbable capitals that became empires without a single natural advantage to their name. By the end, you will understand the hidden forces that can build a civilization from almost nothing. We will explore stone metropolises in the desert, golden kingdoms on remote plateaus, and capitals conjured into being by sheer human will. The journey reveals a startling truth about our past, that geography does not write destiny, people do. What do you think is more powerful for building a legacy, the land you are given or the vision you create? To grasp the scale of their achievement, we first need to understand the rulebook they seem to ignore. For most of human history, building a large, lasting city was not a matter of choice but of necessity, dictated by the landscape. Historians point to a handful of key ingredients as the foundation of any successful early capital. The first and most vital was arable land. A city is a hungry beast, and without vast, fertile fields nearby to feed a dense population, growth is impossible before the first stone is even laid. Next is a reliable, abundant water source, not just for drinking but for irrigation, for sanitation, for daily life. A river like the Nile or the Tigris was not a convenience, it was the very bloodstream of civilization. Then we consider connectivity. A navigable river or a natural deep water harbor acted as the ancient world's highway, bringing in trade goods, new ideas, and wealth from distant lands. A city cut off from these routes risked stagnation. Defense was another critical factor. A hilltop, a peninsula, an island, or a location surrounded by marshes provided a natural barrier against invaders, allowing a society to secure its people and its treasures long enough to develop. And finally, access to resources like timber for building, stone for monuments, or precious metals for trade and artistry gave a city the raw materials to construct its legacy. These were not mere suggestions, they were the fundamental prerequisites for urban survival and power. They were the gifts of geography that most great capitals gratefully accepted. So when we encounter a city that flourished in the absence of these gifts, it forces us to ask a much deeper question. If they did not have what every other civilization needed, what did they have instead? The answer lies not in the soil or the riverbanks, but in the human spirit and some of the most ingenious social agreements ever conceived. This brings us to a city that defies every expectation, a place where the rulebook of geography was not just ignored but seemingly rewritten. In the highlands of central Mexico, far from any coast or major navigable river, lies the vast archaeological site of Teotihuacan. Its name, given by the later Aztecs, translates to the place where the gods were created, and to stand before its monumental avenue of the dead is to feel the weight of that title. Yet the land itself offered no divine favor. The valley here receives limited rainfall, and the soil, born from ancient volcanic eruptions, was initially rocky and difficult to farm. There was no mighty waterway for transport, no natural harbor to welcome traders from across the seas. By all standard measures, this was an improbable, even inhospitable, place to build a metropolis. And yet, build one they did. At its peak around the year 500, Teotihuacan was a colossal urban engine, home to perhaps 125,000 people. It was one of the very first great cities in the Americas, and for centuries its influence stretched across the continent, shaping art, religion, and politics for generations to come. Its pyramids, the massive Pyramid of the Sun and the slightly smaller Pyramid of the Moon, still dominate the skyline, silent testaments to a power that should not have been possible here. So we are left with that compelling central mystery. How did a city rise to such staggering prominence without the natural advantages that fueled every other contemporary civilization? The answer is not written in the landscape, but in the extraordinary human response to its challenges. The power of Teotihuacan was not extracted from the earth, but projected onto it. Faced with a landscape that offered little, its builders performed one of history's most audacious acts of creation. They did not find a sacred place, they built one from the ground up, transforming a geographical disadvantage into a spiritual magnet. Their masterstroke was the city's layout itself, a vast cosmological diagram set in stone. The central avenue of the dead does not follow a river or a trade route. It aligns with the distant Cerro Gordo mountain, a place of deep ancestral significance. At its heart, the Pyramid of the Sun was precisely oriented to mark the sunset on specific days of the year, while the Pyramid of the Moon framed the sacred mountain in a perfect visual embrace. This was not random urban planning. It was a deliberate choreography of architecture, landscape, and the heavens, designed to manifest cosmic order on the human plane. In a world where the divine was interwoven with daily life, this engineered sacredness became the city's ultimate resource. Teotihuacan manufactured the one advantage no river could provide: unimpeachable spiritual authority. It became the place where the gods were created, the axis mundi, the center of the world, and to a center, everything flows. People began to journey from distant regions, not as traders seeking a port, but as pilgrims seeking blessing, knowledge, and connection to the divine. Think of it as the ancient world's most powerful brand. Where caravans might bypass a remote valley, footpaths and roads were forged by the faithful. With every pilgrim came offerings, with every offering came wealth, and with sustained wealth came the artisans, engineers, and laborers who could sustain a metropolis. This pilgrimage economy created a self-fulfilling prophecy of power. The city's grandeur, funded by devotion, only reinforced its status as the preeminent sacred site, attracting more people and consolidating its political legitimacy. Rulers from emerging societies would travel to Teotihuacan to have their own authority sanctified, to learn its architectural styles and religious rituals, and to take them home. The city exported not goods but ideology, its influence radiating across Mesoamerica through the soft power of faith and spectacle. Its true engine was belief, a renewable resource that required no fertile soil, only the perpetual human yearning for meaning and connection. So while other capitals grew rich from what nature provided, Teotihuacan grew powerful from what it promised, crafting a celestial mandate that turned a challenging valley into the beating heart of a continent. But belief alone cannot feed a city of 125,000 people. A spiritual magnet draws pilgrims, but to sustain permanent growth, Teotihuacan needed a tangible, material engine. It found one not in fertile soil, but in the very volcanic rock that made its valley so challenging. Just a short distance from the city lay the Pachuca Mountains, home to some of the finest obsidian deposits in all of Mesoamerica. This volcanic glass, when fractured, produces edges sharper than modern surgical steel, and for the ancient world, it was a resource of immense practical and ceremonial value. Teotihuacan did not just have access to this obsidian, it seized total control over it, turning a single geological gift into the foundation of a vast economic empire. This was the city's second and equally brilliant act of creation. They compensated for their agricultural shortcomings not by farming more land, but by mastering a craft. Within the city's sprawling residential compounds, archaeologists have uncovered entire neighborhoods dedicated to this single industry. These were not simple workshops, but highly organized, almost factory-like districts where skilled artisans transformed raw obsidian into a staggering array of goods. They produced the practical essentials of daily life: razor-sharp blades for cutting and scraping, and sturdy projectile points for hunting. But they also crafted objects of breathtaking artistry and status: intricate ceremonial knives, polished mirrors that captured one's reflection with an otherworldly clarity, and delicate jewelry that gleamed with a dark volcanic fire. This was mass production on a scale unseen in the region, a testament to a highly specialized and stratified economy. By controlling the source and monopolizing the most advanced production techniques, Teotihuacan made itself the indispensable hub. No one else could match the quality or the volume of their wares. So, while the sacred geometry of the city drew people in, it was the promise of economic opportunity that convinced them to stay and build a life. Imagine a skilled napper, a master of shaping stone, arriving from a distant village. In his homeland, obsidian was a rare luxury. But here, in Teotihuacan, the raw material flowed from the controlled mines, and a whole community of craftsmen shared techniques and traded ideas. He could join a guild, perfect his craft, and see his work travel across continents. This economic pull transformed a pilgrimage site into a true melting pot, attracting not just the devout, but also merchants, engineers, and laborers. The wealth generated from this obsidian trade was then reinvested into the city's grandeur, funding the construction of the very pyramids that proclaimed its divine status. It created a powerful cycle where economic might reinforced spiritual authority, and spiritual authority protected and legitimized the economic monopoly. The city's goods, stamped with the unmistakable style and quality of Teotihuacan, became prestige items carried by traders along routes that stretched from the arid north to the lush Maya lowlands. In this way, a city without a natural river for trade built its own commercial networks, with obsidian blades as its currency and religious influence as its passport. They turned a sharp piece of volcanic glass into the key that unlocked an empire. Teotihuacan's power was forged from what it created, but another kind of city mastered the art of the in-between. Their strength came not from manufacturing sacredness or monopolizing a resource, but from controlling the empty spaces everyone else had to cross. These were the Caravanserai Capitals, improbable oases of power that bloomed in the world's most unforgiving landscapes. They rose in deserts, on remote plateaus, and in mountain passes, places that offered little to sustain life but held one priceless strategic value. They sat directly on the only viable path between two wealthy, powerful civilizations. Their entire existence was built on a simple, brilliant premise: if you control the bottleneck, you control everything that flows through it. Without fertile fields or mighty rivers, these cities transformed themselves into essential way stations, the vital links in a chain of commerce and culture that stretched for thousands of miles. Their wealth was not grown or mined, it was taxed, traded, and protected as it passed through their gates. This model required a different kind of genius, not architectural or spiritual, but logistical and diplomatic. It meant providing safety in a sea of danger, water in a parched wasteland, and a neutral ground where diverse cultures could meet, exchange goods, and move on. The city itself became the ultimate commodity, a service hub for the ancient world's long-distance travelers. To understand how this worked, we can look to the heart of Central Asia, along the sprawling network of routes later romanticized as the Silk Road. Here, in the vast, arid expanses between China and the Mediterranean, lay a corridor of extreme hardship. Travel meant weeks under a punishing sun, navigating shifting dunes, and braving the constant threat of bandits. For a merchant's caravan laden with silk, spices, and gems, this journey was not just difficult, it was a monumental gamble. The emergence of a fortified city along this route changed the entire calculus. Suddenly, there was a place to rest weary animals, repair damaged wagons, and secure valuable cargo behind sturdy walls. There was a bustling market to trade some goods for supplies, and a chance to learn about conditions further down the road. The city's rulers provided this security and these services, and in return they took a share of the wealth moving through, often in the form of taxes or tariffs. This created a self-reinforcing cycle. The safer and better supplied the route became, the more traffic it attracted. More traffic brought more diverse goods, more cultural exchange, and more wealth flowing directly into the city's coffers. What began as a simple stopover could, over generations, evolve into a dazzling cosmopolitan center, where one could hear a dozen languages in the market and see architectural styles from empires thousands of miles apart. The Caravanserai capital did not produce the silk or the spices, but it held the keys to the kingdom, controlling their passage and growing immensely powerful by facilitating the dreams and commerce of others. It was a city built on movement, its pulse measured not by harvests, but by the arrival of the next caravan on the horizon. Perhaps no city embodies the spirit of the Caravanserai capital more perfectly than Petra. Carved directly into the rose-red cliffs of a remote desert canyon in what is now Jordan, its very existence seems like a mirage. There were no sprawling fields here, no river to irrigate them, only the harsh, sun-baked landscape of the Arabian desert. Yet for centuries this was not just a city, it was the beating heart of a commercial empire, and its power flowed from a single, precious commodity, incense. Petra sat at the perfect bottleneck, the crucial crossroads where the great incense trade routes converged. These caravan trails stretched from the lush, fragrant forests of southern Arabia, where frankincense and myrrh trees grew, all the way to the wealthy markets of the Mediterranean world and the courts of Egypt. The journey was long and perilous, a months-long trek across some of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth. And right in the middle of it all, controlling the only practical path through the mountains, was Petra. The Nabateans, the people who built this city, were masters of logistics. They did not just occupy this place, they engineered it for one purpose: to be the ultimate service station for the ancient world's most valuable caravans. When a train of camels, laden with sacks of aromatic resin, approached the narrow canyon entrance known as the Siq, they were entering a world of security and opportunity. Inside the hidden city, merchants found everything they needed. There were secure storerooms cut into the rock to protect their goods, bustling marketplaces to trade and resupply, and comfortable lodgings to rest after the grueling desert crossing. The Nabateans provided guards to ensure safety, brokers to facilitate deals, and a stable, neutral ground where cultures from across the known world could meet. In return, they levied taxes on every ounce of incense that passed through their gates. This transit fee, collected over generations, funded the city's astonishing transformation from a simple way station into a monumental capital of staggering beauty. But to sustain a permanent population in a desert canyon, they faced an even more fundamental challenge than security. They needed water. This is where Nabatean ingenuity truly shines, revealing that their greatest monument is not the famous treasury facade, but what lies beneath the sand. They became hydrological geniuses, constructing an elaborate, city-wide system to capture, channel, and conserve every drop of precious water. They carved intricate networks of channels and dams into the cliff faces to divert flash floods from seasonal rains. They built vast underground cisterns lined with waterproof plaster to store millions of gallons of water for the dry seasons. Terracotta pipes distributed this water throughout the city, to homes, to gardens, and even to ornate public fountains that must have seemed miraculous in the desert heat. Petra did not have a river, so they created a synthetic one, a lifeline of their own design. This mastery of water allowed them to support a population of perhaps 20,000 people, to cultivate small garden plots, and to present a vision of lush, civilized abundance in the midst of barren rock. It sent a powerful message to every weary traveler. This is not just a stop along the way. This is a place of permanent power and sophistication. The wealth from the incense trade paid for the hydraulic engineers and the stone carvers, who in turn made the city viable and magnificent, which attracted more trade in a perfect cycle of prosperity. Petra's story shows us that the most powerful advantage a city can have is not a gift from nature, but a solution to nature's obstacles. They turned a geographic bottleneck into a global intersection, and a desert canyon into a wonder of the world, proving that sometimes the most fertile ground for an empire is the space between everyone else. The true wonder of Petra was not carved from the rock face but channeled through it. In a land where water was more precious than gold, the Nabateans performed a kind of alchemy, transforming the desert's greatest threat into its most vital resource. Their genius lay in understanding that the arid landscape was not empty, but pulsed with a dangerous seasonal rhythm. The rare but violent winter rains would send torrents of water crashing through the narrow canyons in devastating flash floods, capable of wiping out an entire caravan in moments. Where others saw only destruction, the Nabateans saw potential. They did not try to fight the desert's power, they learned to dance with it, building a hidden, city-wide nervous system of water control. This was not simple well digging, it was sophisticated, large-scale hydraulic engineering, conceived centuries before modern principles were formalized. Their first line of defense and their first act of capture was a series of massive diversion dams, constructed at key points in the surrounding wadis. These stone barriers intercepted the raging floodwaters at the canyon mouths. Instead of allowing the destructive surge to barrel into the city's heart, the dams gently redirected the flow into a carefully planned network. From these dams, the water was funneled into a labyrinth of channels and tunnels, some carved openly along cliff faces, others bored deep into the mountain itself. These conduits acted like arteries, distributing the captured floodwater away from population centers and toward their ultimate destination, storage. The Nabateans carved over 200 vast cisterns throughout Petra and its surroundings. These were not simple holes in the ground, but expertly engineered reservoirs, some capable of holding over 150,000 gallons each. Their interiors were lined with multiple layers of waterproof plaster, a mixture of lime and crushed pottery that created an impermeable seal, preventing the precious liquid from seeping back into the thirsty earth. This network was so comprehensive and efficient that it could capture an estimated 40 million gallons of water from a single storm, enough to sustain the city for months. Think of it as a city-wide battery charging up during brief, intense pulses of energy from the sky, then discharging that stored power slowly and steadily to fuel daily life. Terracotta pipes, some still visible today, then carried this water from the cisterns to every corner of Petra. It flowed to public fountains where travelers could drink, to ritual baths for ceremonial cleansing, to the homes of the elite, and even to small, terraced gardens that added a splash of green to the rose-red city. This mastery of hydrology did more than just prevent thirst, it created an illusion of impossible abundance. For a merchant arriving from the desolate sands, the sight and sound of running water in the middle of a desert canyon was a profound statement of control and civilization. It proclaimed that this was not a precarious outpost, but a permanent seat of power that had tamed the very elements. The water system was the silent, non-negotiable foundation upon which every other aspect of Petra's grandeur was built. It allowed a large, permanent population of artisans, guards, and administrators to thrive, which in turn made the city a reliable and attractive hub for trade. The wealth from incense tariffs funded the maintenance and expansion of the waterworks, which secured the city's survival, attracting more wealth in a perfect, self-sustaining loop. Petra teaches us that the most powerful advantage a city can possess is not what the land gives you, but how ingeniously you reshape what it withholds. From the engineered waterways of Petra, we journey to a different kind of marvel, one where power was built not on trade routes but on a profound understanding of the land itself. Far to the south, on the high plateau of southern Africa, stands the enigma of Great Zimbabwe. Its location seems, at first glance, to be another exercise in improbability. This was no crossroads of continents, no sacred valley drawing pilgrims. It was built on a dry, granite ridge, far from any major river system or coastline, in a region where rainfall is fickle and droughts are a constant threat. The landscape offered no obvious agricultural bounty, no easy transport links to the wider world. Yet, between the 11th and 15th centuries, this remote plateau became the heart of a thriving kingdom, its authority radiating across the region. The evidence of its power is written in stone, literally. Scattered across the hilltops and valleys are the ruins of monumental architecture, dry stone walls built without mortar, rising in elegant, curved formations. The most famous of these is the Great Enclosure, a vast elliptical wall standing over 30 feet tall in places, a breathtaking feat of engineering and labor. Inside these walls, archaeologists have uncovered artifacts that speak of astonishing wealth, including delicate gold jewelry, intricately worked copper wire, and fine pottery from as far away as China and Persia. This creates a compelling contradiction. How did a society in such a seemingly marginal environment accumulate such vast riches and command the labor to build structures that have endured for nearly 1,000 years? The stones of Great Zimbabwe hold a secret, one that reveals a genius for turning subtle environmental advantages into a sustainable source of power. The answer lies not in the soil, but in the veins of gold running through the earth to the west. Great Zimbabwe's improbable power was built on a brilliant two-step strategy: control the source and command the route. Deep in the interior, in regions to the west and south of the plateau, lay rich but scattered gold deposits. Mining these precious flakes and nuggets was a local endeavor, but getting that gold to the wider world was a monumental challenge. The lucrative markets were 1,000 miles away, on the Swahili Coast ports of the Indian Ocean, like Kilwa and Sofala, where Arab and Persian traders waited with glass beads, fine textiles, and Chinese porcelain. Between the mines and the coast lay a vast, difficult landscape. This is where the rulers of Great Zimbabwe inserted themselves as the indispensable middlemen. They established a political and economic hegemony over the interior, creating a stable, secure zone from which gold could flow. Think of them as the central bank and the security force for an entire regional economy. Local chiefs would bring gold to the plateau, not as tribute to a conqueror, but as part of a managed trade system. In return, they received coveted goods from the coast, symbols of prestige and connection to a global network. The city's elites, residing in the stone enclosures, grew wealthy by taxing this flow, by setting favorable exchange rates, and by ensuring the safety of the trade routes that converged on their capital. But gold was a seasonal trade, dependent on mining cycles and caravan schedules. To create a permanent, resilient foundation for their society, they paired this glittering long-distance trade with a more grounded source of wealth: cattle. On the grassy plains surrounding the granite hills, the kingdom maintained vast herds. Cattle were the ultimate local currency, a living bank account. They provided meat, milk, and hides, and their very ownership measured a family's status and wealth. This combination was masterful. The gold trade brought in exotic wealth and global goods, elevating the elite status and funding monumental building projects. The cattle economy provided day-to-day sustenance, social stability, and a buffer against poor harvests or trade disruptions. One connected them to the world, the other rooted them to the land. This self-reinforcing system created a powerful, stratified society where an elite class, secure in their stone compounds, could orchestrate an economic network that turned a remote plateau into the heart of a commercial kingdom, proving that true advantage often means controlling the bridge between two worlds. Great Zimbabwe's power emerged from mastering the space between mines and markets, but some rulers sought to create power from an even more abstract foundation, a shared idea. This brings us to a final, fascinating category of improbable capitals, cities built not by geography but by decree. These were deliberate acts of political will, conceived on drawing boards and brought to life in stone and mortar, often in places of no prior significance. Their primary purpose was not defense or trade, but unification. When a ruler sought to forge a new nation from disparate tribes, rival clans, or conquered territories, establishing a capital on neutral ground was a stroke of strategic genius. Choosing an existing, powerful city risked favoring one faction, embedding old rivalries into the very heart of the new state. But building a brand new city in a previously unimportant location sent a clear, powerful message. Here, on this blank slate, we begin together. The advantage these cities gained was not natural. It was entirely political, born from centralized planning and the sheer force of a unifying vision. They became symbols of a fresh start, where loyalty was to the new state and its leader, not to ancient hometowns. The city itself was the first and greatest project of the nation, a physical manifestation of its ideals and aspirations. To see this principle in action, we can look to a ruler who understood the power of symbols perhaps better than any other, Peter the Great of Russia. For centuries, Russian power had been centered in Moscow, a city steeped in the traditions of the old boyar aristocracy and the Orthodox Church. Peter, determined to drag Russia into the modern world and open a window to Europe, saw Moscow as a symbol of everything he wanted to leave behind. He needed a new capital that would embody his vision of a modern, maritime, and European-facing empire. The location he chose could not have been more audacious. In 1703, on a swampy, mosquito-infested delta where the Neva River emptied into the Baltic Sea, he ordered the construction of St. Petersburg. The site was a logistical nightmare, perpetually damp, prone to flooding, and devoid of any usable building materials, which all had to be imported. Thousands of laborers faced immense hardship in the brutal conditions, a somber reminder of the human cost behind such grand visions. Yet Peter's will was absolute. He compelled nobles to build mansions there, moved government offices, and declared it the capital. Why this place of all places? Because it was a statement written in geography. St. Petersburg was a seaport, Russia's long-desired gateway to the West. It was built on territory freshly won from Sweden, symbolizing Russia's new military might. And most importantly, it was entirely his creation, free from the shadow of Moscow's old ways. The city's elegant canals and Baroque palaces were not just beautiful, they were a three-dimensional blueprint for a new Russia. Its very existence proclaimed that the future was not found, but built, and that political will could conquer even the most inhospitable marsh. St. Petersburg became the ultimate capital of unification, unifying a vast, sprawling nation not around an old tribal heartland, but around a bold, shared project of becoming a European power. St. Petersburg was a declaration carved from a swamp, but it was not the first time a ruler had conjured a capital from pure vision. Centuries earlier, another conqueror stood on a strip of land between the sea and a lake, and saw not what was there, but what could be. Alexander the Great, having just taken Egypt from the Persian Empire, did not choose the ancient pharaonic capitals of Memphis or Thebes for his new seat of power. He rode along the coast until he found a location of startlingly empty potential, a narrow limestone ridge separating the Mediterranean Sea from the freshwater Lake Marotes, just west of the Nile Delta. There were no great temples here, no sprawling cities, just a few small fishing villages. But Alexander, with his strategist's eye, saw the perfect blueprint for a new kind of city. The site offered a natural double harbor protected from the open sea by the island of Pharos. To the south, Lake Marotes connected to the Nile's canals, creating a backdoor water route straight into the heart of Egypt. This was the masterstroke, a city designed from the ground up to be the ultimate nexus, linking the agricultural wealth of the Nile Valley with the trade networks of the entire Mediterranean. He reportedly traced the city's outline in barley meal on the sand, a symbolic act of creation, naming it Alexandria ad Egyptum, Alexandria by Egypt. It was to be a Greek city on Egyptian soil, a bridge between worlds. When Alexander marched east, he left his blueprint behind, and its realization fell to one of his generals, Ptolemy. What happened next was a lesson in how political will, when combined with lavish patronage, can accelerate history. Ptolemy and his descendants, the Ptolemaic dynasty, did not just govern from Alexandria, they invested in it as the ultimate projection of their power and sophistication. They made it the capital of their Hellenistic kingdom and poured unimaginable resources into its construction and intellectual life. The city grew at a phenomenal pace, its grid of broad streets laid out with geometric precision, a stark contrast to the organic labyrinths of older Egyptian cities. They built the legendary Lighthouse of Pharaohs, one of the ancient world's tallest structures, a guiding beacon that literally and metaphorically put the new capital on the map for every approaching ship. But their most profound investment was in the mind. They founded the Great Library with the audacious goal of collecting a copy of every known book in the world, and the Museum, a temple to the muses that functioned as the world's first state-funded research institute. They offered scholars free room, board, and a handsome salary to simply think, debate, and discover. This turned Alexandria into a magnetic pole for genius, attracting the greatest minds of the age, from the mathematician Euclid to the astronomer Aristarchus. The city's power was thus threefold: political as the new administrative heart, economic as the premier trade hub where Egyptian grain met Mediterranean goods, and intellectual as the global center of knowledge. Alexandria did not emerge from the landscape, it was imposed upon it, a perfect engine of civilization built to specification, proving that the most potent advantage a city can have is a powerful idea and a dynasty willing to spend a fortune to make it real. Alexandria's blueprint of power was a marvel of planning, but its influence would inspire an even more consequential act of refoundation. Centuries later, a Roman emperor faced an empire straining at its seams, its center of gravity shifting irrevocably eastward. Rome itself, for all its glory, was now too distant, too politically entangled, and too vulnerable to effectively govern the vast, wealthy provinces of Greece, Anatolia, and the Near East. The empire needed a new heart, and the man who would provide it was Constantine the Great. His choice was not a blank slate, but a strategic masterstroke. He selected the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, a modest trading post perched on a triangular peninsula at the meeting point of Europe and Asia. On the surface, its advantages were purely potential. It possessed the superb, deep-water harbor of the Golden Horn, a natural crescent of calm water protected on three sides. It controlled the narrow Bosporus Strait, the only maritime passage between the grain-rich Black Sea and the trade-rich Mediterranean. But beyond this geographic promise, the site offered little. The peninsula was rocky, its water supply limited, and its existing infrastructure wholly inadequate for a world capital. Constantine did not choose a ready-made city. He chose the ultimate fixer-upper, a location whose only true resource was its irreplaceable position. He renamed it Constantinople, the city of Constantine, and with that act, he initiated history's most ambitious urban upgrade. This would not be a city that grew organically from the land, but one whose every advantage was built, paid for, and imposed by the boundless will and treasury of the Roman state. The transformation was staggering in its scale and speed. Constantine and his successors understood that a strategic location is meaningless if you cannot defend it or sustain a massive population upon it. So they began to write a check that only an empire could cash. investing in monumental infrastructure that would artificially create the conditions for greatness. Their first and most famous act was the construction of the legendary Theodosian Walls. These were not simple fortifications, they were a statement in stone, a multi-layered defensive system that would become the most formidable in the medieval world. An outer wall, a moat, an inner wall with towering battlements, and nearly 100 defensive towers created a barrier that was both physically and psychologically impenetrable. For over 1,000 years, these walls would turn away armies, making the city an island of security in a sea of chaos. But walls alone do not make a metropolis. A city destined for hundreds of thousands of inhabitants needs water, and the local springs were a pathetic trickle compared to the need. The Roman solution was one of breathtaking engineering arrogance. They built the longest aqueduct system of the ancient world, stretching over 250 kilometers into the forested hills of Thrace. This was not a single channel, but a complex network of bridges, tunnels, and inverted siphons that defied the terrain. The crowning achievement was the Aqueduct of Valens, a double-tiered arcade that marched across the city's hills, delivering a constant, roaring river of fresh water to immense underground cisterns, like the vast basilica cistern with its forest of recycled columns. They gave a thirsty peninsula the hydrological capacity of a river valley. This imperial investment created a self-fulfilling prophecy of power. The unparalleled defenses made Constantinople the safest vault in the world, attracting the wealth, the relics, and the talented citizens fleeing instability elsewhere. The artificial river from the aqueducts allowed for public baths, lavish gardens, and a population that could swell without fear of drought. The state funded the construction of granaries to store Egyptian wheat, ensuring the bread supply that kept the populace content. It built the Great Palace Complex and the monumental Hagia Sophia, architectural wonders that proclaimed divine favor and imperial permanence. Every aspect of the city's viability was a manufactured advantage. Constantinople became the ultimate defensive node and logistical hub not by accident, but by design. It was a capital that proved the ultimate advantage is not what nature gives you, but what you have the resources and the vision to build. The rocky peninsula was merely the canvas, the Roman Empire was the artist, and with strokes of mortar and marble, they painted a city that would stand as the central pillar of civilization for a millennium. Constantinople's walls were a declaration of security, but some cities drew their power from a far more ancient and potent source, a direct line to the divine. Beyond trade routes and strategic bottlenecks, another force could elevate a patch of earth to the center of an empire, a sacred mandate. In a world where the spiritual and political realms were inseparable, a location deemed holy by the gods themselves became an irresistible magnet for power. These were not cities chosen for their resources, but for their revelation, places where heaven touched earth, and where that contact bestowed an authority no army could conquer and no geography could limit. A holy site commanded a different kind of loyalty, one that transcended tribal allegiance or economic interest, binding people through shared faith and the hope of divine favor. This spiritual gravity could transform a remote mountain, a modest grove, or a simple shrine into the pulsing heart of a civilization, attracting not just pilgrims but the patronage of kings and the legitimacy that turned chieftains into emperors. The city built upon such ground did not have to be defensible or fertile. It simply had to be authentic, the genuine article in a world of imitations. Its primary export was blessing, and its economy ran on devotion. Consider the ancient city of Jerusalem. Its location in the rocky highlands of Judea offered few natural advantages: no major river, no large port, and limited fertile land. Yet for millennia it has been fought over, rebuilt, and revered as the center of the world by three major faiths. Its power sprang not from the landscape, but from a series of profound spiritual events embedded in its very stones. For Jewish tradition, it was the site of the binding of Isaac and the location of the Temple Mount, the dwelling place of God's presence. For Christianity, it was the place of the crucifixion and resurrection. For Islam, it was the direction of first prayer and the site of the Prophet's night journey. Each layer of belief cemented its status as a place of ultimate encounter. This made Jerusalem a capital of faith long before it was a capital of any earthly kingdom. King David's decision to establish his capital, there was a masterstroke of political theology, uniting the 12 tribes of Israel not around his own hometown, but around a neutral, pre-existing sacred center. He did not create its holiness, he harnessed it, building his palace and bringing the Ark of the Covenant to the city. His son Solomon then constructed the first temple, physically anchoring the nation's faith to that specific hilltop. From that moment, Jerusalem's fate was sealed. Its spiritual significance attracted pilgrims from across the diaspora, whose offerings funded its grandeur. It drew the attention of conquerors who sought to co-opt its sanctity for their own rule, and it provided a unifying symbol for a people, a focal point of identity that endured even when the city itself was in ruins. The city's geography became secondary, its hills and valleys important only because of what they witnessed. Its true strength was as an idea, a celestial address that could compel millions to journey across continents, to fight, to build, and to dream of a return. That is the power of a religious mandate. It turns geography into theology and a city into a promise. Jerusalem's sacred stones held a power that transcended geography, but in the modern era, a different kind of symbolic choice would forge a nation's identity. The story of Ankara, Turkey, is perhaps the most striking recent example of a capital conjured into being by sheer political vision. For millennia, it was a place of modest importance. Known in antiquity as Ancyra, it served as a crossroads for Hittite and later Phrygian cultures, and it even became the capital of the Roman province of Galatia. Yet it never rivaled the colossal prestige of nearby Constantinople, later Istanbul. It remained for centuries a provincial center, overshadowed by the glittering metropolis on the Bosporus. That all changed in the chaotic aftermath of the First World War, as the Ottoman Empire collapsed and a new Turkish state fought for its survival. The nation's revolutionary leader, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, faced a monumental decision. Where should the heart of this fledgling republic beat? The obvious choice was Istanbul, the imperial capital for over 4 centuries, steeped in Ottoman history and global renown. But Atatürk saw that very history as a burden. Istanbul was a symbol of the old empire, of theocratic rule, and of a dynasty that had ultimately led to defeat and foreign occupation. It was also perilously vulnerable, a coastal city easily targeted by foreign navies, as recent events had tragically proven. He needed a capital that represented not the past but the future, a clean break and a fresh start. His gaze turned inland to the dusty, wind-swept Anatolian plateau and to the town of Ankara. On the surface, it seemed an improbable, even baffling choice. It was small, underdeveloped, and lacked the infrastructure of a modern capital. But Atatürk saw precisely what earlier empire builders had seen in their own improbable sites: strategic and symbolic advantages that were more powerful than any ready-made grandeur. Ankara sat at the very geographical center of the new Turkey, a powerful statement of unity for a nation reclaiming its Anatolian heartland. It was far from vulnerable coastlines, nestled among defensible hills, making it a secure fortress from which to direct a war of independence. Most importantly, it was symbolically neutral, free from the entrenched interests and imperial memories of Istanbul. Choosing Ankara was a declaration that the republic would be built from the ground up by the people of Anatolia for a secular and modern future. Ataturk did not find a capital, he willed one into existence, transforming a provincial town into the embodiment of a national idea, proving once again that the most potent foundation for power is often not a legacy, but a vision. Ankara's transformation reveals a deeper truth about all these improbable capitals. While geography, trade, and faith provided frameworks, the final, decisive ingredient was often human will. A single visionary leader or a dynasty united by a long-term plan could look at a swamp, a desert, or a rocky hill and see not its limitations but its latent potential. These individuals possessed a rare form of foresight, the ability to commit the resources of a generation, or even a century, to a gamble whose payoff their own eyes might never see. They did not follow the map of obvious advantages. They drew a new one, betting that their vision could manufacture the conditions for greatness where nature had provided none. This required a profound belief in the power of strategy over circumstance. A ruler like Peter the Great did not merely tolerate the hardships of the Never Marshes. He accepted them as the price for achieving a strategic objective no existing Russian city could offer, a direct maritime gateway to Europe. His vision was so compelling and his authority so absolute that he could command an entire nation to invest its wealth and labor into realizing it. The city became a physical manifestation of his will, a statement that Russia's future would be built, not inherited. Similarly, the Ptolemaic dynasty in Alexandria did not just administer a city. They curated an intellectual and economic hub with meticulous, generational investment. They understood that to make Alexandria the center of the known world, they needed more than warehouses and docks. They needed the great library and the lighthouse, institutions that would attract the finest minds and the richest ships. Their vision extended beyond their own lifetimes, creating a cultural and commercial magnet that would endure for centuries. This long-term strategic thinking is what turns a calculated gamble into a self-fulfilling prophecy. By pouring immense resources into infrastructure, security, and prestige projects, these leaders created new realities. They built the walls that made a city safe, the aqueducts that made it viable, and the monuments that made it glorious. Each stone laid, each canal dug, sent a powerful signal. This place is important, this place is permanent, this place is the future. That signal, broadcast over decades, attracted the very elements the location lacked: people, wealth, and talent. Merchants moved their operations to where the ruler had invested in harbors. Scholars flocked to where the ruler funded libraries. Soldiers defended the citadel the ruler had made impregnable. The initial act of visionary investment created a gravitational pull, drawing in the human capital that would sustain and expand the city's power. In this way, leadership did not just exploit an advantage, it conjured one into existence. The story of these cities reminds us that while rivers and fertile plains are gifts, vision is a choice, and sometimes the most powerful force in history is not the landscape we are given, but the future a determined mind decides to build upon it. This gravitational pull of a growing city reveals a fundamental law of human civilization, one that often overrules geography. It is called the network effect. In its simplest form, the network effect means that the value of a place increases exponentially with each new person who chooses to live, work, and trade there. A city starts with nothing but a plan, a few buildings, and a handful of believers. Then, something remarkable happens. The first blacksmith sets up shop because he knows the builders will need nails and tools. A merchant arrives, seeing an opportunity to sell supplies to the blacksmith and the builders. A baker follows, knowing all these people will need bread. Each new arrival does not just add one person, they add a new connection, a new service, a new reason for the next person to come. The city becomes more useful, more interesting, and more viable with every single choice to join it. This is the invisible engine that can lock in the success of even the most improbable capital. Once a critical mass of population and activity is achieved, the location's original disadvantages, the poor soil or the remote valley, begin to matter less and less. The city's value is no longer in what the land provides, but in the vibrant, living network of people it contains. Think of it like a social media platform. The first few users find it quiet and of limited use, but as more friends and creators join, the platform becomes the place to be, not because of its superior technology, but because everyone else is already there. Leaving means losing your connections. In the ancient world, a city like Teotihuacan or Constantinople achieved this critical mass. For a merchant deciding where to establish his family, the calculus shifted. A fertile river valley with a small village offered good land but few customers. The improbable capital, now teeming with people, offered a crowded market, specialized suppliers, legal courts to enforce contracts, and a community of peers. The initial hardship of the location was outweighed by the immense opportunity of the network. This created a powerful, self-reinforcing cycle. Success attracted more success. The concentration of talent sparked innovation as metalworkers shared techniques, scribes traded knowledge, and administrators developed new systems to manage the complexity. The city became a talent magnet, drawing the ambitious, the skilled, and the clever from the surrounding regions, who in turn made the city even more productive and attractive. This is how a man-made advantage becomes permanent. The network, once established, is incredibly difficult to dismantle or replicate. It represents thousands upon thousands of individual decisions, relationships, and investments, all woven into a dense social and economic fabric. You could not pack up Constantinople's network of scholars, ship captains, and silk traders and move it to a nicer hillside. The city was the network. This effect also created a form of urban inertia, a powerful resistance to change. Even if a rival location later emerged with better natural harbors or richer soil, it faced an uphill battle. Relocating an entire ecosystem of human capital was a monumental, often impossible task. People had built homes, shops, and lives. They had buried their ancestors in that soil and worshipped in its temples. Their social and professional worlds were anchored there. The cost of leaving the network, of starting over outside the buzzing hive of activity, was simply too high for most. So the improbable capital, born from vision and sustained by the network effect, would endure. Its power became entrenched not in stone walls or riverbanks, but in the collective choice of its inhabitants to stay, to build, and to belong. The city's greatest asset became its own crowded, chaotic, brilliant self. Yet this very strength could become their ultimate vulnerability. A city built on a river has a certain resilience, its lifeblood flowing from the mountains, indifferent to which king sits on the throne or which god is worshipped in the temple. But a capital whose power flows from a single, brilliant idea, a controlled trade route, or the will of one dynasty, rests on a more precarious foundation. When that sustaining factor vanishes, the entire reason for the city's existence can evaporate with startling speed. The artificial advantage, so powerful in its creation, often lacks the deep, slow roots of a natural one. Its success is a magnificent performance, but one that requires the stage, the script, and the audience to remain perfectly aligned. The moment that alignment fails, the lights can go out very quickly. Consider the fate of Petra. For centuries, its wealth was absolute, guaranteed by its monopoly on the incense trade and its mastery of the desert. But what happens when the world finds a new route or falls out of love with the old commodity? By the late Roman period, maritime trade routes through the Red Sea were becoming safer and more efficient, allowing ships to bypass the long, arduous desert caravan trails altogether. The demand for incense also began to wane as new religious practices and preferences emerged. The very bottleneck Petra controlled was slowly becoming a backwater. The city's incredible hydraulic system, a marvel of engineering, required constant, skilled maintenance funded by that trade wealth. As the caravans grew fewer and the tariffs shrank, the resources to maintain that system dwindled. Canals silted up, cisterns cracked, and the artificial river that sustained life in the canyon began to dry up. Without its economic engine, Petra could no longer afford the upkeep of its own survival infrastructure. The city didn't fall to a great army storming its cliffs. It simply faded, its life support system switching off one careful repair at a time. The desert, held at bay for so long by genius and investment, quietly began to reclaim its stones. The city built on movement was ultimately stilled by it. Great Zimbabwe tells a similar story of shifting currents. Its power was the power of the middleman, a brilliant position so long as the gold flowed from the interior and the demand persisted on the coast. But in the 15th century, that flow was disrupted. The gold mines to the west may have become exhausted, or political instability disrupted the supply chains from the interior. More decisively, new trade networks began to emerge, with Portuguese explorers establishing direct contacts along the African coast, seeking to bypass traditional intermediaries altogether. The rulers of Great Zimbabwe found their crucial position in the middle suddenly irrelevant. The wealth that had funded the stone enclosures and attracted regional loyalty ceased to flow. Without that economic glue, the political unity it supported likely frayed. The elite may have simply moved on, following the wealth to new centers of trade, leaving their magnificent stone city as a silent monument to a system that had run its course. Its power was not rooted in the land itself, but in a specific, fragile configuration of global exchange, and when that configuration changed, the city's purpose dissolved. Even the mightiest of willed cities could succumb to this fragility. Constantinople, the ultimate manufactured fortress, endured for 1,000 years beyond the fall of Rome precisely because its advantages of defense and infrastructure were so overwhelming. But it too was vulnerable to the collapse of its sustaining system, the Roman state that built it. While it outlasted the Western Empire, the final fall of Constantinople in 1453 came not because its walls failed, but because the broader Byzantine state that maintained them had shrunk to little more than the city itself. It had become a magnificent shell, its population a fraction of its former size, its treasury depleted, its hinterland lost. The immense cost of maintaining the Theodosian Walls and the vast aqueducts eventually outstripped the resources of the diminished empire that remained. The final Ottoman conquest was a culmination of a long, slow weakening of the very system that had created the city's artificial advantages in the first place. This pattern reveals a poignant truth about these improbable capitals. Their brilliance was also their potential curse. A river keeps flowing through wars and revolutions. A fertile plain will still yield crops for whoever farms it, but a pilgrimage site can fall out of favor. A monopoly can be broken, a visionary dynasty can end. The very specificity of their success, the cleverness of their solution to a lack of natural gifts, could make them exquisitely sensitive to the tides of history. They remind us that what is built by focused human intention can be unmade when that intention shifts or the world simply moves on. So we are left to wonder, is the legacy of such a city measured in the centuries it shone, or in the silence that followed? The silence that followed in Petra was not sudden, but a slow, relentless whisper of sand. The city's entire existence was a delicate equation, balancing the immense cost of its survival against the wealth flowing through its gates. That equation depended on one variable remaining constant: the world's desire to travel by land. When Roman merchants began to master the monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean, a new calculus emerged. Sailing directly from the Egyptian Red Sea ports to India and back was arduous, but it bypassed months of desert travel, bandit tolls, and the heavy tariffs of the Nabatean middlemen. Slowly, predictably, the great incense caravans began to thin. A trickle of trade still moved along the old routes, but the golden river that had funded Petra's miracles was drying up. The Roman annexation of Nabatea in 106, while bringing a measure of imperial peace, also accelerated this shift. The new Roman administration was less invested in maintaining the intricate, localized systems of Nabatean power and more focused on integrating the region into their broader, maritime-focused economy. The specialized knowledge and communal effort required to maintain the city's hydrological heart began to fade. Maintaining that artificial river was a generational commitment. The diversion dams needed constant clearing of silt after each flash flood. The plaster lining the vast cisterns required skilled artisans to mix and apply, and the network of channels demanded vigilant cleaning to prevent blockages. This was not a one-time construction project. It was a perpetual conversation with the desert, a conversation funded by trade gold. As that funding dwindled, the conversation faltered. A crack in a cistern lining went unrepaired, letting a season's water seep into the thirsty ground. A segment of aqueduct clogged with debris, diverting a vital stream away from the city's gardens. Each small failure compounded the next. The magnificent water system, a triumph of human ingenuity over nature, began to consume itself through neglect. The desert, patient for centuries, did not attack. It simply waited for the human effort to cease, and then it resumed its work. Sand drifted into the once bustling colonnaded street. Seasonal floods, no longer tamed by dams and channels, occasionally scoured the canyon floor. The population, whose ancestors had mastered this landscape, faced a difficult choice. Without the economic pull of the caravan trade, the extreme effort of living in this stone fortress became harder to justify. Why labor constantly to maintain a marvel when a simpler life was possible elsewhere? People did not flee a cataclysm. They made a series of practical decisions over generations, gradually moving to places where water was easier and opportunity closer. The last custodians likely left not with a bang, but with a final, weary glance at a system they could no longer sustain. Petra did not fall. It was gradually surrendered, stone by stone, canal by canal, back to the silence from which it had been so brilliantly carved. Its fate is a profound lesson in the sustainability of power. A city built on a brilliant, artificial advantage must work eternally to maintain it, for when the human will and wealth that built it move on, the landscape reclaims its original, indifferent state. Yet this fragility was not the only possible ending. For every city that faded when its singular purpose vanished, another demonstrated a startling capacity for reinvention, proving that a capital built on political will could achieve a resilience as enduring as any river valley. The ultimate example of this lies in the same city that seemed to defy the desert's logic for Petra, but on a far grander and more enduring scale. Constantinople did not merely survive the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, it thrived for another 1,000 years, becoming the heart of a new civilization we now call the Byzantine Empire. Its survival was not a passive accident of geography, but a masterclass in active, relentless adaptation. When the western provinces fell into chaos and the great grain shipments from Egypt and North Africa became unreliable, Constantinople could not rely on its old imperial supply line. The city faced a crisis that could have spelled its end. Instead, its leaders orchestrated a profound economic transformation. They shifted the empire's agricultural heartland to Anatolia, turning the fertile plains of what is now Turkey into the new breadbasket. They reorganized the military into a system of farmer soldiers, the theme system, who defended the land they cultivated, creating a self-sustaining defensive network. And they pivoted their legendary trade position, becoming the indispensable middleman not just for goods, but for ideas between a fractured Europe and the rising powers of the Islamic world and the steppes of Central Asia. Its walls, the greatest ever built, bought at the time to make these changes, repelling invasion after invasion while the society within evolved. the city that was built by imperial decree learned to live by its own wits, adapting its economy, its military, and its culture to a new and more dangerous world. Constantinople's story shows that the most resilient advantage a city can possess is not a static gift, but the dynamic ability to change its own formula for survival. It asks us to consider what separates a fleeting wonder from a lasting legacy, and whether the true test of a great city is not how it rises, but how it chooses to endure when the world it was built for disappears. For centuries, the ruins of these improbable capitals were shrouded in mystery, often explained away by myths or lost civilizations. Early explorers and colonial observers, confronted by great Zimbabwe's stone walls or Teotihuacan's vast pyramids, could not reconcile their grandeur with the apparent poverty of the land. They spun tales of foreign founders, like the Queen of Sheba or a lost tribe of Israel, unable to accept that local societies could achieve such heights without the natural advantages they themselves relied upon. This colonial narrative did more than misattribute credit. It actively obscured the truth, painting these sites as enigmatic dead ends rather than the brilliant solutions they were. Modern archaeology has quietly dismantled these myths, replacing speculation with data, and in the process has revealed the true sophistication of the human systems that powered these places. The story is no longer one of mysterious decline, but of intentional, ingenious creation. Take Great Zimbabwe. For decades, the dominant theory insisted its stonework and artifacts were too advanced for indigenous African cultures. But then, science began to listen to the soil itself. Detailed archaeological and botanical analysis of the surrounding plains revealed something profound. Not a landscape left wild, but one carefully managed. Pollen samples and soil chemistry showed evidence of intensive, rotational cattle grazing over centuries. This was no accident. The people of Great Zimbabwe were not passive inhabitants of a marginal land. They were active landscape engineers, using controlled burns and herd movement to cultivate specific grasses and maintain the health of the pastures that supported their wealth. The very earth testified to a complex, sustainable economic system, one built on deep ecological knowledge rather than obvious natural bounty. Similarly, at Teotihuacan, the scale of human organization was long underestimated. The Avenue of the Dead and the Great Pyramids were visible, but the city's true urban fabric remained hidden beneath vegetation and later settlements. Then came LIDAR, a laser-based surveying technology that can peer through forest canopies and map the ground beneath. When archaeologists flew LIDAR over the Teotihuacan Valley, the city that emerged was staggering. It showed a meticulously planned metropolis of over 2,000 densely packed apartment compounds, arranged in a precise grid that extended far beyond the ceremonial core. These were not simple huts, but multi-family dwellings with courtyards, drainage systems, and evidence of specialized craft production. The LIDAR maps revealed vast, hidden districts, each potentially organized around a specific trade or guild, connected by a network of streets and canals. This was not a chaotic collection of pilgrims, but a highly stratified, meticulously managed urban engine, home to a diverse population drawn there by opportunity. The evidence painted a picture of a society that compensated for its lack of a river by building a social river, a flow of people, skills, and goods so well organized it created its own momentum. Even Petra's story has been refined. Excavations of its garbage dumps, mundane as they sound, have provided a fiscal diary of the city's life. By analyzing layers of refuse, archaeologists can trace the rise and fall of imported luxury goods, the changing diet of its inhabitants, and the gradual simplification of material culture as trade wealth declined. This granular record shows the city's end not as a sudden catastrophe, but as a slow, granular process of economic contraction and difficult choices, mirroring the gradual silting of its own water channels. These scientific techniques, from soil cores to laser pulses, have shifted the narrative entirely. They allow us to see past the monumental facades and into the day-to-day logic that made these cities work. We no longer see inexplicable wonders in impossible places. Instead, we see the clear fingerprints of human ingenuity, the evidence of societies that looked at a landscape's lack not as a limit, but as a design challenge. They built economies from trade routes, forged unity from shared faith, and sustained populations with engineered water and managed herds. The mystery is solved, and in its place is something far more compelling, a testament to the boundless capacity for human adaptation and the profound truth that a city's greatest resource has always been, and will always be, the collective mind of its people. The evidence from these vanished cities presents a powerful challenge to a long-held assumption in history, the idea of geographic determinism. This is the belief that the destiny of societies is largely written by their physical environment, that mountains, rivers, and coastlines dictate the script of human progress. For generations, this view made intuitive sense. The Fertile Crescent gave rise to the first agricultural states. The Nile's predictable floods sustained pharaonic Egypt, and the protected harbors of Greece fostered maritime trade and democracy. The map, it seemed, was the master planner, but the stories of Teotihuacan, Petra, and Great Zimbabwe force us to reconsider. They reveal a more complex and empowering truth. Geography does not write destiny. It merely sets the stage, providing a set of initial conditions, some generous, some harsh. The real drama, the plot of rise and fall, is authored by human choices, by the strategies and innovations communities devise in response to their particular patch of earth. Think of it this way: a river valley offers a promising stage with good lighting and built-in props. A desert canyon provides a bare, rocky platform with terrible acoustics. Geographic determinism would say only the first stage can host a great performance. But history shows us that human societies are not passive actors waiting for the perfect set. They are playwrights, directors, and set designers all in one. They can look at that barren canyon and decide to build their own spectacular set, to reroute the lighting, and to write a play so compelling that audiences will travel across continents to see it. The landscape is the raw material, not the final blueprint. This shift in perspective changes how we understand power. If a city's success were solely determined by its natural gifts, then the story of civilization would be a simple tally of who had the best river or the most gold mines. But it is not. The chronicle of these improbable capitals is a chronicle of human ingenuity in the face of geographic constraint. It is about the political innovation of a Constantine, who saw a rocky peninsula and envisioned an impregnable fortress capital to unify an empire. It is about the religious ideology of Teotihuacan's builders, who transformed a dry valley into a cosmic center so sacred it drew pilgrims like a magnet. It is about the trade strategy of the Nabateans, who turned a geographic bottleneck into a global toll booth. And it is about the technological adaptation behind Petra's water system or Great Zimbabwe's pasture management, where societies engineered their own life support. These are not secondary factors, they are the primary engines. They demonstrate that the most critical resource is not fertile soil or a deep harbor, but the collective human capacity to imagine a different future and then build the social, economic, and technological systems to make it real. A river can be a highway, but only if someone builds the boats and establishes the trade agreements. A hill can be a fortress, but only if someone designs the walls and organizes the community to defend them. The natural advantage is potential energy. It is human society that converts it into kinetic force. This does not mean geography is irrelevant, of course. It presents the initial puzzle, but the history of these cities proves that there is never just one solution to that puzzle. Human creativity, driven by faith, ambition, or necessity, can discover solutions the landscape itself seems to deny. The ultimate lesson from their stones is one of profound agency. It tells us that while we may not choose our starting point on the map, we possess an immense power to choose what we build upon it. Our strategies, our beliefs, and our willingness to adapt can, against all apparent odds, rewrite the rules of the game. This contrast becomes vividly clear when we place two Mesoamerican giants side by side. Centuries after Teotihuacan's peak, another civilization would rise in the same valley, but with a radically different relationship to the landscape. The Aztecs, or Mexica, founded their capital, Tenochtitlan, not on a dry valley floor, but on a swampy island in the middle of Lake Texcoco. At first glance, their chosen site seemed to possess the natural advantage Teotihuacan so conspicuously lacked: a formidable aquatic defense. The lake itself was a massive moat protecting the city from land-based armies. Yet this apparent gift came with a monumental set of challenges. The island was soggy and unstable, the lake water was brackish and undrinkable, and the need for expansion meant conquering not just enemies, but the very water they stood in. Where Teotihuacan had to manufacture sacredness and economic pull from scratch, Tenochtitlan had to perform a breathtaking act of environmental engineering just to create a stable foundation. Their pathways to power, therefore, diverged dramatically from the very first stone. Teotihuacan's genius was spiritual and economic, building a magnet for pilgrims and a monopoly on obsidian. Tenochtitlan's genius was hydrological and political, transforming a defensive wetland into a thriving, interconnected metropolis through sheer force of collective labor. One city turned a spiritual idea into a physical reality, the other turned a physical obstacle into an urban masterpiece. This comparison reveals that there is no single formula for an improbable capital, only a shared capacity for brilliant, context-specific solutions. Teotihuacan compensated for a lack of natural gifts by creating irresistible human ones. Tenochtitlan took a natural gift of defense and then had to engineer, day by day, all the other necessities of life that the gift itself denied them. Both became immense powers, but their stories remind us that every advantage carries a hidden cost, and every disadvantage can spark a revolutionary innovation. The true measure of a civilization may not be where it builds, but how imaginatively it responds to the specific, daunting puzzle of its own home. These ancient stories of improbable power are not relics of a distant past. Their echoes can be heard in the hum of servers and the blueprint of a modern capital, proving that the principles behind their rise are as relevant today as they were 1,000 years ago. Look at the transformation of a California valley known for its apricot orchards into the global nerve center of technology. Silicon Valley possessed no natural harbor, no major mineral wealth, and was not a pre-existing political capital. Its power emerged from a different kind of fertile ground, the deliberate cultivation of human capital and a unique, self-reinforcing ecosystem. The seed was Stanford University, but the growth was fueled by a revolutionary social agreement, the venture capital model. This system created a financial network effect, where the success of one startup funded the dreams of the next, attracting the world's brightest engineers and most ambitious entrepreneurs to a single region. Like Teotihuacan becoming a magnet for spiritual pilgrims, Silicon Valley became a magnet for intellectual ones, its currency not obsidian blades or incense, but ideas and code. Its advantage was entirely manufactured, built on the synergy between academia, risk-tolerant finance, and a culture that celebrated disruptive innovation. It is a caravanserai capital for the digital age, controlling the bottleneck of technological talent and venture funding, where the caravans are startups and the tariffs are equity stakes. Across the world, another modern parallel rises from the Brazilian highlands. In the 1950s, the decision was made to move Brazil's capital from the coastal metropolis of Rio de Janeiro to a purpose-built city in the country's geographic center, Brasilia. This was a direct echo of ancient political foundations, a capital created by decree to unify a vast nation and develop its interior, much like Constantine's Constantinople or Ataturk's Ankara. Architects Lucio Costa and Oscar Niemeyer were given a blank slate, a savanna with no prior urban history, and told to design a city that embodied the future. The result was a breathtaking exercise in modernist urban planning, a city shaped like an airplane or a bird in flight, where every government building, residential superblock, and traffic interchange was part of a grand, unified vision. Brasilia's power is purely symbolic and administrative, a statement of national identity and forward-looking ambition carved into the red earth. It had no traditional geographic reason to exist, but it was willed into being to solve a political and social challenge, proving that the ancient impulse to build a capital as an act of pure vision is alive and well. These modern examples show us that the fundamental forces are unchanged. Whether through the economic alchemy of venture capital or the political will of a national blueprint, we still build centers of power by identifying or creating new forms of advantage, turning intellectual networks or national ideals into the fertile soil from which empires, digital or political, can grow. So what patterns emerge when we step back from these individual stories? Beneath the unique details of desert kingdoms and swamp cities, a set of recurring principles comes into focus, a kind of hidden playbook for building power from a position of apparent weakness. The first and perhaps most straightforward principle is the control of a critical trade resource. When a city lacks fertile land, it can compensate by controlling something else everyone wants. This is not about having a little bit of something. It is about achieving a near-total monopoly, becoming the indispensable source or the mandatory middleman. Teotihuacan did not just have obsidian. It controlled the finest deposits and the most advanced workshops, making its blades and mirrors the standard across a continent. Petra did not grow incense, but it commanded the only secure path it traveled on, taxing every aromatic sack. Great Zimbabwe did not possess all the gold, but it controlled the stable political zone and trade routes through which that gold flowed to the coast. In each case, they identified a single high-value commodity and built their entire economic engine around its movement, turning a geographic lack into a commercial stranglehold. A second closely related principle is the mastery of a vital technology. If the environment denies you a necessity, you invent a way to manufacture it. This is engineering as a survival strategy. Petra's entire existence hinged on its breathtaking hydraulic system, a technology that captured flash floods and stored water on an industrial scale. Without it, the city was just a pretty canyon. The Nabateans did not find water, they built a synthetic water cycle. Similarly, the network of canals and chinampas, the floating gardens that sustained Tenochtitlan, transformed a defensive lake into a prolific food source. This technological mastery does more than solve a problem. It becomes a source of power in itself, a demonstration of such sophisticated control over the environment that it commands respect and attracts those who need that expertise. A third powerful driver is the establishment as a pilgrimage or ideological center. When you cannot be the richest or most defensible place, you can choose to become the most sacred or meaningful one. This is the principle of spiritual gravity. Teotihuacan engineered itself as the place where the gods were created, aligning its streets with celestial bodies and distant mountains to become a cosmic diagram in stone. Its power was ideological, drawing pilgrims who brought offerings and spread its religious influence. Jerusalem's authority across multiple faiths stems from this same principle, where historical and spiritual events sanctified the stones, making it a focal point of faith that transcends ordinary geographic logic. A city can manufacture purpose, becoming a magnet for devotion that fuels its economy and cements its political legitimacy. Fourth, we see the deliberate political foundation for unity. This is power by blueprint. When a ruler needs to forge a new nation from disparate parts, building a capital on neutral, often challenging ground can be a masterstroke. It sidesteps old rivalries and symbolizes a fresh start. Constantine's Constantinople, Atatürk's Ankara, and even Alexander's Alexandria were acts of political will made physical. These cities were founded not where it was easiest, but where it was most strategically useful for unifying a territory or projecting a new identity. Their primary advantage was political clarity, a clean slate upon which a new social contract could be written in city blocks and marble monuments. Finally, all of these drivers are amplified and locked in by the self-reinforcing magic of network dynamics. Once a critical mass of people, skills, and activity gathers, the city's value becomes inherent in its own crowded existence. A merchant goes there because other merchants are there. A scholar stays because the library and his peers are there. This network effect creates immense inertia, making the city resilient even if its original advantage fades. It is the ultimate human ecosystem, where each new connection increases the value for all others, transforming an improbable settlement into an essential hub simply because everyone has already decided it is. These 5 principles: resource control, technological mastery, ideological centrality, political foundation, and network amplification, are the recurring threads in the tapestry of improbable power. They show us that while geography proposes, human ingenuity ultimately disposes, writing its own rules for ascent on even the most unlikely terrain. These cities whisper a quiet rebellion against the map. Their ruins are not monuments to good fortune, to a lucky roll of the geographic dice. Instead, they stand as enduring proof of a far more profound force in history: human agency. They remind us that civilization is not a passive inheritance granted by a benevolent landscape, but an active project, a series of deliberate choices carved into stone and etched into social contracts. What we see in the dry valley of Teotihuacan or the red cliffs of Petra is not what the land gave, but what people decided to build in spite of it. This shifts our entire perspective on the past. For too long, the story of human ascent has been framed as a tale of endowment, of who had the best river or the richest soil. These improbable capitals demand we tell a different story, one of ingenuity over inheritance. Their legacy is a testament to strategic foresight, the kind of vision that looks at a swamp and sees a gateway, or at a barren plateau and envisions a commercial crossroads. It is a story of collective effort, of generations laboring not just to construct walls, but to maintain the intricate, invisible systems of water, trade, and belief that made those walls meaningful. They teach us that the most critical resource for any society is not buried in the earth, but housed in the collective mind, in the capacity to imagine a different future and then organize to bring it into being. This perspective is both humbling and empowering. It humbles because it strips away the easy excuse of circumstance. These societies could have looked at their challenging homes and simply survived, making the best of a difficult situation. But they chose audaciously to thrive. They chose to create advantage where none seemingly existed, to write their own rules for power, and that is where the empowerment lies. Their stories tell us that while we do not choose our starting point on the map, we possess an immense, often untapped, capacity to choose what we build upon it. Our strategies, our shared beliefs, and our willingness to innovate can, against all apparent odds, rewrite the script of what is possible. The true lesson of these stone metropolises in the desert and these golden kingdoms on remote plateaus is not about the mysteries of the past, but about the enduring potential of the human spirit to shape its own destiny, to look at a world of constraints and see, instead, a canvas for creation. The journey from the deserts of Petra to the highlands of Zimbabwe reveals a consistent answer to our initial mystery. These cities did not rise in spite of their geography, but by inventing entirely new forms of power to transcend it. They prove that the ascent of a civilization is rarely a story of what the land provides, but of what people create. When fertile soil was absent, they mastered the flow of a single precious resource, from obsidian to incense to gold, turning themselves into indispensable commercial hubs. When a mighty river was missing, they engineered their own life support, capturing floodwaters in desert cisterns or building synthetic harbors on swampy islands. When natural defenses were lacking, they constructed walls of such scale they became their own geographic fact. And when a unifying heartland did not exist, they laid a new capital on a blank slate, forging political unity from pure vision or drawing spiritual pilgrims to a manufactured sacred center. Their true advantage was never in the ground, but in the collective human mind, in the social agreements, the shared beliefs, and the relentless ingenuity that turned constraint into a catalyst for breathtaking innovation. These stories ask us to look beyond the obvious maps of history, beyond the rivers and coastlines, to see the subtle networks of trade, faith, and will that truly built our world. They encourage us to see the past not as a predetermined script written by mountains and valleys, but as a living testament to the creative power of human societies to imagine and then build a different future. So what do you think? Can you think of another improbable city, ancient or modern, that rose to power by rewriting the rules? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed unraveling this historical mystery with us, be sure to subscribe for more journeys into the forgotten corners of our past.